The thick walls of the courtroom, imbued with years of biased decisions, seemed alive. They breathed, listened, absorbed the despair of those who rarely manage to achieve justice here. The air was filled with something oppressive, heavy, not with words but with gazes, thoughts, fears. Maya Jefferson felt this weight as soon as she entered. She did not flinch, but her back was pierced by a familiar feeling of cold, slippery contempt. She was used to it. But today was different. Today she was not just unwanted, she was despised even before she could say a word. The courtroom was almost full. Along the rows sat people, representatives of the law, random listeners, journalists waiting for a high-profile case. Against the wall, slightly in the shadows, loomed two policemen, Troy Miller and Kevin Rower. They did not look concerned, rather the opposite. Their confident smirks irritated Maya more than any words. They already knew how this would end. Their defense, Judge Raymond Harper, known for his blind loyalty to the police, the very man whose verdicts were never surprising. He cast a brief glance at Maya and leaned over his papers, as if he did not even consider her a significant figure in this room. The policeman's lawyer gave a signal, and the judge cleared his throat. "Let's not drag out the process." His voice was calm, almost lazy, as if everything was already decided. Maya took a breath, but did not rush to speak. She felt the gazes. A woman in the first row, perhaps a journalist, looked with interest, as if trying to figure out who she was. Someone in the back of the room barely perceptibly shook their head, as if foreseeing the outcome. The judge turned to the defense. "The defendants, as you know, are accused of unlawfully stopping a citizen and exceeding their official authority. However," his pause was eloquent, "these few seconds were meant to make everyone understand. He did not intend to make this process complicated. The decision had already been made. However," he continued, "the prosecution has no real grounds to believe that Officers Miller and Rower violated the law. Their actions were within their authority." The policemen exchanged glances, barely suppressing satisfied smirks. Maya felt her fingers clench into a fist under the table. "Breathe. Keep yourself in check. This is just the beginning." She stood up. "Your Honor," her voice was calm, but there was firmness in it, "I thought that the judicial process involves analyzing the facts before rendering a verdict." Harper raised an eyebrow. Silence hung in the room. "The facts are that the prosecution has not presented sufficient evidence of intentional violation. At this point," Maya took a step forward, "I have not presented them yet." Her voice changed. It was no longer just a legal instrument. There was steel in it. She turned to the room. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Maya Jefferson. I am a federal prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice." The air in the room seemed to change instantly. A dull murmur ran through the rows. Someone stopped writing in a notebook. Someone leaned forward. The journalist in the first row half rose. Her eyes widened. The faces of the policemen contorted, and the smirks they had been flaunting since the beginning disappeared, as if erased by an invisible hand. Judge Harper paled. Maya paused, savoring the moment. "I came here not as a random victim of biased treatment," she continued. "I came here as a representative of the law, as someone who will pursue justice despite all prejudices. And believe me, I have evidence." Now everything had changed. In the courtroom, there were no more confident smirks, only anxiety. Maya sat down, allowing her last phrase to hang in the air. "Let them realize who they are dealing with." The alarm clock broke the silence of her modest apartment in Brooklyn. Maya Jefferson opened her eyes and felt that heaviness that came every time before an important day. She ran her hand over her face, sighed, and slowly sat up on the bed. Sunlight lazily filtered through the blinds, casting stripes on the wooden floor. As always, she started her morning with coffee. The bitter taste of the drink helped her focus, bring her thoughts into order. Soft jazz played in her ears, a reminder of those times when life seemed simpler. She was used to the routine, a cup of coffee, a short walk around the lively neighborhood, thoughts about upcoming cases. Today she was expecting a new challenge, but she did not yet know that a small change in her habits, driving a car instead of taking the subway, would be a fateful turn. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel as she drove onto the streets of Manhattan. The traffic was tense. The radio played calmly. Suddenly, her heart tightened when red and blue lights flashed in the rearview mirror. The siren awoke an alarm deep within her consciousness. She sighed, reminding herself, "Stay calm." She did not know that this encounter would change her life forever. The traffic light ahead was flashing yellow when a deafening siren sounded behind her. Maya glanced in the rearview mirror. The flashing red and blue lights of a police car cut through her consciousness. Her heart tightened, but she immediately regained her composure. Calmness. That was important. She turned on her hazard lights, smoothly pulled over to the side of the road, and turned off the engine. Hands on the wheel, no sudden movements. A standard rule known to every black woman in America. Footsteps on the gravel approached. In the mirror, she saw two officers, one taller with sharp features, the other stocky, with a self-satisfied smirk. Troy Miller and Kevin Roar. "Good morning, ma'am." Miller's voice sounded cold. "Your license and registration." "Of course, officer. May I know the reason for the stop?" "Documents first." He cut her off. She slowly reached for the glove compartment, keeping every movement under control. Maya's heart pounded in time with her thoughts as the cold air touched her skin. She slowly got out of the car, feeling Officer Miller's gaze fixed on her, as if he had already passed judgment. The second policeman, Roar, stood nearby, his posture relaxed, almost careless. But there was a hidden threat in it. "Hands on the hood, legs apart," Miller commanded. Maya took a deep breath. She knew that any resistance would only make the situation worse. Her body tensed as her hands touched the cold metal of the car. She felt exposed, defenseless. Ruar approached closer, slowly, deliberately looking her up and down. This gaze made her skin crawl. She heard the soft rustling of clothing. Miller was putting on gloves. "Are you sure this is necessary?" Her voice was calm, but a storm raged inside her. "Are you resisting?" Miller asked with a hint of threat. "No," she bit her lip. "But what is the reason for the search?" Ruar snorted. "The reason is that we decided so. Is that a good enough reason?" At that moment, she realized this was not just a random stop. They were waiting for something. Maybe a reaction. Maybe fear. She knew these games and knew how to play them. Miller's cold fingers began methodically searching her body. He pressed harder than necessary, as if trying to show his power. His hands lingered on her lower back, then moved down her legs. "Clean," he said with a hint of disappointment. "Surprisingly," Ruar snorted. "And I was sure I'd find something interesting." Maya clenched her teeth. She wanted to say a lot, but she knew one wrong word and everything could get worse. "Well, let's check the car," Miller continued, not waiting for an answer. "Do you have a warrant?" Her voice was still calm. Ruar burst out laughing. "A warrant? You're funny, lady. Do you think we need a warrant when you're acting suspiciously?" She watched as Miller opened the door and began rummaging through her things. He indifferently turned over her bag, shaking out the contents onto the seat. "You should be more careful," she said, watching his every move. "Oh, really?" He looked up. "Or what?" She paused, then slowly said, "Or you will make a serious mistake." Something flashed in Miller's eyes. Irritation? Displeasure? Perhaps he realized that she was not as defenseless as she seemed. Ruar leaned against the car, folding his arms across his chest. "Keep your mouth shut, ma'am," he said softly, but there was a clear threat in his voice. Miller finished searching the car and stepped back. "Looks like you're clean, but you know what?" He threw the ticket on the ground. "I'll still write you a ticket." Maya looked at the paper. Speeding. She looked up and looked straight into Miller's eyes. "Thank you for your service, officers," she said in an even voice. Ruar smirked. "Take care of yourself, miss. You never know what might happen." They left, leaving her alone. She looked at the paper in her hands. Her heart was still beating fast, but now not from fear, from anger. Maya sat at the kitchen table, looking at the ticket that now lay before her, like a symbol not only of the humiliation she had endured, but also of the challenge that the system had thrown at her. Her fingers slowly traced the paper. She felt a fire within her that could not be extinguished. Her phone vibrated. On the screen was the name Marcus Reed, an old friend, a lawyer, one of the few she trusted. She knew that Marcus was not just someone who would support her morally. He was a fighter, just like her. "Talk," she answered without preamble. "I saw the video." Marcus's voice was tense. "You were filmed on a phone. It's already all over the internet." Maya exhaled. She knew that such things quickly became public, but she did not think it would happen so soon. "Is this good or bad?" she asked. "Depends on what you're going to do next." Marcus paused, then added, "You're not going to leave it like this, are you?" Maya clenched her teeth. "Of course not. I have records, detailed." She turned her laptop toward herself, glancing at the open document where she had already begun drafting a memorandum about what had happened. "I want these officers to answer for their actions." "Then you'll need a team," Marcus sighed. "I'll help, but you need more allies. Maybe involve the press," Maya thought. She did not like to attract attention to her personal life, but this was already beyond personal. This was a matter of principle. "I have colleagues I trust," she said. "I'll talk to Jennifer Roble. She works at the Department of Justice. She can help raise this issue to the level of a federal investigation. Then don't waste time. The sooner you start acting, the harder it will be to hush up this case." The conversation ended and Maya looked at the ticket again. She felt the tension giving way to determination. She would not just defend herself, she would make sure that no one else went through something like this unpunished. She began to act. First, a call to Jennifer. "We need to talk," she said when Jennifer answered. "I've already seen the news." Jennifer's voice was calm, but there was caution in it. "Do you understand what you're getting into?" "Yes," Maya replied, "and I will not back down." The game was just beginning. The trial, which began with bias and condescending smiles, had now turned into an arena where a real battle for justice was unfolding. Tension hung in the courtroom, almost physically palpable. People in the gallery whispered, and there was a sense that something important was about to happen. Maya sat at the plaintiff's table, her face calm, but her eyes reflected a cold determination. Today was her day. Next to her was her team, Marcus Reed, a loyal friend and comrade, and Jennifer Roble, who had contacted the Department of Justice to push the case to the federal level. Judge Harper, who at the beginning of the proceedings was inclined towards a quick acquittal of the police, now looked concerned. The public resonance caused by the video and the documents collected by Maya had done their job. Now it was no longer possible to simply hush up this case. "Prosecutor Jefferson, do you have anything to add?" The judge's voice sounded more restrained than on the first day of the hearings. Maya stood up, holding a folder with the collected materials. "Yes, Your Honor, I have a closing statement," she said, her voice clear and confident. She slowly looked around the room. Police officers Miller and Ruar no longer looked so self-assured. They avoided her gaze. From the very beginning, this process seemed predetermined, but the truth turned out to be stronger. This is not just a case of an illegal stop. This is a fragment of a system that has allowed itself to be unpunished for too long. Today we have shown that no one is above the law, not even those who are supposed to uphold it. Silence hung in the room. "I am not asking for leniency. I am not asking for special treatment. I demand the justice that every citizen of this country deserves." Her voice became firmer. "This is not about revenge, not about punishment for the sake of punishment. This is about restoring people's faith in justice." She slowly closed the folder and looked at the judge. "And I believe that the court will make the right decision." Judge Harper, frowning, nodded. For the first time during the entire trial, there was no arrogance in his gaze. He turned to the jury, giving them a sign that it was time for them to retire to deliver the verdict. The courtroom froze in anticipation of the decision. Maya felt the anger, fear, and tension of these days now turning into one thought. She had done everything she could. The jury returned sooner than expected. The foreman stood up and read the verdict. "The defendants are found guilty." A murmur swept through the room. Miller and Ruar froze. This was not just a verdict, it was a signal that even those who were accustomed to power could no longer consider themselves invulnerable. Maya slowly exhaled. Her hands were no longer shaking. She looked up and met Marcus's gaze. He nodded slightly. It was all worth it. She left the courtroom, feeling the weight of the past days beginning to lift. But she knew this was not the end. This was just the beginning of a long journey to real change. But today she had won a victory, and that was enough.